Hi everyone, we're going to try this today with me recording a lecture on my iPad where I can draw at the same time. So let's see how this goes. All right, so I'll be doing three separate ones. It'll be shorter. One will be the upper GI, then I'll do the esophagus and the barium minima. So just as a refresher, this is the same stuff we went over in lab, but just so you have a recording, this presentation is going to be based on sthenic patients. The biggest thing that you have to know from an image analysis standpoint for the registry with the upper GI is where the barium is located and what we are looking at with the different positions. So the differences of the stomach is dependent on the body habitus. If you remember talking about this during lab, let me make sure I can get my little, oops, I'm on the wrong screen here. Let me switch over to my Notability so I can draw. You guys know how much I love to draw. The wrong one. Let me get to the right one. Here it is. Here it is. Okay. So now I can draw. All right. So the differences in the stomach depending on the body habitus. Remember the hypersthenic patient, everything is going to be wider, broader, and the stomach is going to be more on a horizontal plane. So our pylorus and our fundus are all kind of going to be on the same level. And then our duodenal bulb is going to be hiding behind the pylorus over here. So another thing to keep in mind with this specific body habitus is that, let me change the width of this. This is way too wide here. Let me get that smaller, is to remember that on the hypersthenic patient, with it being more horizontal, the pylorus and the duodenal bulb end up over here on the other side of the vertebral bodies, okay? So keep that in mind. And then on our sthenic average size patient, it looks like a stomach, you know, kind of like a textbook stomach, what we expect it to look like, right? It's gonna be, you know, more like an average shaped stomach. The pylorus is going to fall partially over, you know, the same side as the fundus, and then the duodenal bulb is hiding behind here, okay? And then there's our descending duodenum. So this is pretty much going to still be on, you know, on the vertebrae, but it's going to be closer to the left side of the vertebral bodies. Then on our hyposthenic and asthenic patient is what we have, the J-shaped stomach, the J shape. And on this particular patient, sorry, getting text messages there. Now I've got to figure out how to stop that. And I can't pause on this recording, or I would, and I would go change that. But using the iPad so that I can draw, I'm not able to stop it. Okay, so on the J-shaped patient, our, you know, our fundus is going to be above, and our pylorus is going to be down here, and this is our duodenal bulb. And so now on the J-shaped stomach, everything is pretty much on the left side of the body, you know, kind of on the other side of the vertebral body. So this is important to keep in mind when you're looking at a patient, to just kind of know where their stomach is going to be located. So ribs in the body habitus, I think we discussed this when we did abdomens, like when we were doing KUBs. But just remember that the hypersthenic patient, the abdomen is going to be broad all the way across the lower thorax. So what I'm talking about is like right here. Here's our lower thorax. And you see how broad it is? It is going to be broader than the pelvis, okay? So we've got pelvis here, but their, you know, thorax kind of extends beyond the area of the pelvis. The widest part of their abdominal cavity is going to be at the upper abdomen as it extends below, you know, the pelvis on both sides. So we're having an abdomen that's extending over here, okay? Then when we get to our sthenic patient, our average size patient, this one obviously is the most common, and they're going to have what's considered an average torso width. So here's our lower ribs now. And if you look at this, typically their abdomen is in alignment with their pelvis. So the soft tissue kind of around that is going to be in alignment with the pelvis. That's going to be our average patient. Then our hypo and asthenic patients are going to have a thinner, well, I guess that's not the word I'm looking for, but the lower part of their thoracic cavity is not going to be as wide as their pelvis. So their pelvis is going to extend out here, and you can see that the width of their abdominal cavity is not as wide as the pelvis at its broadest place. So it's going to be, and they typically have like an indentation down here at the waistline, like that. So that's going to be our hypo and our asthenic. So our obese patient, who is not really in a category that we usually put like, on a lot of these, but this is what I need you to know about that, is that the obese patient can have the same bony structure as any of the above body habitus. If you look at these closely, you look at the pelvis and the spine. The pelvis and the spine do not change, right? It's just the rib cage and the abdomen that changes on these body habitus. So when we get to the obese patient, keep in mind that their pelvis, especially when you are, I'm so sorry, there goes Duke. Keep in mind that when you're x-raying this patient and their abdomen or their spine and pelvis, is that their pelvis and their bones are still the same size. Typically, these patients don't have, they're skinny inside, right? And so that doesn't look any different. But here you can see how broad the base of their, the wider part of their thorax, the lower thorax is. And then their abdominal soft tissue typically extends beyond the pelvis and down, covering up the pelvis. And this is what we call a curtain. I don't know if that's like an official term, but we refer to that as a curtain. And oftentimes you have to put your hand down there and lift up their curtain of abdominal tissue to palpate where the pelvis is. So just keep that in mind, but their bony structure is the same. So in terms of, here is just a little bit better, broader of a picture again. Hypersthenic, you can see how, it's the same, usually the hypersthenic, it's going to go past the pelvis. Our sthenic is going to be about the same width as the pelvis. Our hyposthenic is going to be much thinner. And remember, their organs drop lower. Usually everything is going to be lower, but when you get over into the asthenic is when everything really drops down almost into the pelvis. All of their abdominal structures, they're so tall that the gravity sets in. They're so tall and thin that everything just kind of falls almost into the pelvis, all their abdominal structures. So on the J-shaped stomach, why did I say the sthenic is J-shaped with the duodenal? The sthenic is J-shaped, but anyways, the duodenal bulb is going to be at the level of L1 and L2. The hyposthenic and asthenic are also J-shaped, and I guess that makes sense. Their sthenic patient, if we go back up here and look at our sthenic patient, where'd it go? If we look up here at our sthenic, it's still a J, but not really. I don't know why the book says that. But anyways, I consider asthenic and hyposthenic more of our J shape. But anyways, just know that on a sthenic patient, that the duodenal bulb is at the level of L1 and L2. And the hyposthenic and asthenic are going to be much lower at the level of L3 and L4. It's always important that we know where the duodenal bulb is located for the different body habitus. So quick review of the stomach anatomy. The lumen means that's the cavity of a hollow organ. The stomach has a lumen. The intestines have a lumen. The veins and arteries have a lumen. And so they're hollow until they're filled with something. Of course, veins and arteries, blood. Stomach is going to be filled with, gastric contents, right? And then the intestine, feces. So they are technically a hollow organ lined with lumen. The rugae, all that means is that's the folds of the lumen. It's just the shape of the lumen. It's all those little squiggly lines all through here. That's the rugae. And we definitely see that when we are looking at images with the barium lined, especially once they roll the patient over a little bit and then they add the physies and patient gets a little bit of a double contrast going, we're going to see that rugae really well. Gastritis is very, they need to see the rugae. It tells them a lot of information about what potential pathology is going on. So also another little quick review. You do need to know this is the lesser curvature of the stomach. This is the greater curvature of the stomach. These are terms you will hear quite a bit. They may refer to an ulcer that is in the fundus along the greater curvature, or a ulcer that's in the fundus along the lesser curvature. So you need to know these things. And then, of course, our duodenal bulb, our pyloric sphincter is where food contents leave the stomach and enter the duodenal bulb. And then, of course, we talked about our lower esophageal sphincter and all of that, and the cardiac antrum right here. But those are kind of the biggies that you need to know. So negative contrast versus positive contrast. I'm sure this is just a review for you, but negative means radiolucent. So that is contrast that is going to be in the form of effervescent crystals. They expand the stomach and rugae for better visualization, i.e. air, right? That's what creates air. Air is the negative contrast. Air equals negative contrast. Positive is going to be our radiopaque. So you definitely need to know that these two words are associated with each other, and these two words are associated with each other. And of course, the positive radiopaque is going to be barium. A single contrast study, all that means is that they're only introducing the contrast. They are not, meaning it says here barium, but it could also mean IsoVu, any kind of contrast that they use. Double contrast study is going to mean that they add the barium in the air. That's all the double contrast means. So typically, always our upper GIs are going to be a double contrast. And then our esophagus is going to be a single contrast, but the barium minimas can sometimes be a single column, what they call a single column, which is single contrast with just the, IsoVu or barium, or a double contrast, which is where they add the air. The purpose of the single contrast study of the upper GI is to demonstrate abnormalities of the stomach and the lumen contour. So they do sometimes do this single contrast study and then add the physies later. The purpose of the double contrast study in the upper GI, that's a misspelling, and I can't fix it on this screen, is to visualize the abnormal. What in the world? I must have been having a typo issue that day. The upper GI is to visualize the abnormalities in the mucosal details and in the contour of the stomach and the duodenum. So those are, some things that you need to keep in mind, because that will play a part in how a radiologist may want to address any kind of previously known type of pathology that they already knows there. So our views for the stomach, for the upper GI, when we're doing a PA stomach. So again, this is based on a sthenic patient. So all of these that we look at today just are kind of be the average on the sthenic patient. But on this, the stomach is going to be aligned almost vertically with the duodenal bulb. Again, we talked about this at L1 or L2, okay? The lesser and greater curvatures are seen. The esophagogastric junction is visualized, which is going to be over here, but I don't see it particularly on that. It is in here, it's just I don't see it. There's no barium in there. The pylorus, of course, and the fundus, and then we've got our body. And the duodenal bulb is in partial profile. So on this particular one, we've got pylorus right here, the duodenal bulb is right here, but it's not filled, okay? So, and it's kind of hiding behind the pylorus a little bit, so we don't see it very well. Again, we talked about what views we see the pyloric or the duodenal bulb in really well, and the pyloric sphincter, and that's going to be in our LPO and our RAO. And we're going to look at that here in just a minute. Air contrast is going to be demonstrated in the fundus when we're doing a PA. Again, keep in mind that the fundus lays posterior, okay? So when we roll a patient over into a PA, then the fundus of the stomach is now higher up than the pylorus in the body. So all that, all the barium sinks down to the bottom. The spinous processes should be aligned in the middle of the vertebral bodies. That's how we're going to tell if we are in a good position. As you can tell up here, this patient's starting to rotate a little bit up top. The spinous processes, that's what I just said. And then the distances from the pedicles, just like we look at a chest x-ray or abdomen, the distance from the pedicles to the spinous processes should be equidistant. So pedicle, equidistant. These aren't really equal. These are a tad bit rotated, but that's okay. When there's rotation, when there shouldn't be, Let's see. The PA projection fills the body and pylorus of the stomach with barium, allowing the contours to be evaluated. A non-rotated PA projection is obtained by positioning the shoulders and the ASISs at equal distances to the IR. Rotation is effectively detected on this view by comparing, like we just talked about, the distances from the pedicles to the spinous process. And as you can see, there is just a tad bit of rotation here. Not enough to, obviously not enough to worry about, but there is just a tad. If we're in a PA, remember, this goes back to our basic chest principle. If we are in a PA, everything is wider, 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 okay? So that means where there is a wider distance between the pedicle and the spinous process, that's the side that has a wider distance between the IR and the patient's body, okay? So since there's a wider distance, this means that the right side was closer to the IR on this one. Close to IR on this view, on this image. Okay, and then a RAO stomach, keep in mind again, this is still technically a posterior projection, right? Because we have the patient rolled over and rotated towards the right side with the right shoulder being closer to the IR. Let's see. Body habitus is going to be important when we do obliques, and mainly you just need to remember that your hypersthenic patient, your larger patient, is going to require a 70-degree oblique. A sthenic patient is going to require only a 45-degree oblique, but your tall, skinny, and just very thin patients are going to only require a 40-degree oblique. So it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because you'd almost think it would be the opposite. Counterintuitive. So, like, let's just take, for instance, our hypersthenic patient right here, okay? You can tell the whole goal when we're in an oblique position, this RAO or LPO, is that we're looking for the duodenal bulb. So when you only rotate this patient 45 degrees, you are not moving the stomach over enough because it's laying so almost horizontal. You're not moving structures over enough for it to be separated from the duodenal bulb. Your average size patient, which is here, 45 degrees is going to do just fine to separate those structures right here. And then, of course, our hyposthenic, those structures are already kind of separated. You can see right here, they've kind of got the green. The green is the duodenal bulb, and the purplish is the pylorus. So you can kind of see it's a little bit further separated here. Okay, so again, this is what the RAO stomach is going to look like, and we discussed how to determine what position a patient is, what position they're in. You can always look at your spine, so we can tell by looking. We've got our rib attachment here, and we've got our, I can't really, this spine is hard to look at, but you can tell that the zygapophyseal joint is right over here, and so that we know that this patient is in some kind of oblique position. And then we take into account that the right marker, we're going to assume that they marked it correctly and that they marked the right side down on the right side. So if that is the case, then we're going to know that this is an oblique and it's marked with the right side down. And then we see that the air is in the fundus, which automatically, like I said, we know that the patient's in some kind of PA position. And so our only choice would be an RAO because we're seeing the duodenal bulb really well. We would not see this in an LAO. We're seeing that duodenal bulb separated really well from the pyloric sphincter. And then we've got our pylorus over here. And so those are all the things that you want to take into consideration. Here is a little video that I made to kind of demonstrate the duodenal bulb, descending duodenum in both fundus and stomach body without superimposition. Let me see if I can get this to work. Let's see if this goes. Please let this work. The reason that the RAO view is so important is because you can see all of the important stomach structures without superimposition. They aren't without part of the stomach overlapping each other without the spine overlapping. It's just a really good view to show you the pylorus, the fundus, and the duodenal bulb. So this is a patient. What I did is I rotated the patient around. Sorry, so we were in an AP position, and so now I'm going to rotate them around. And so now we are in a PA position. And as you can tell, like from right here, the pylorus is superimposed by the spine. So when I rotate the patient 40 to 70 degrees, it opens up the pylorus. You can see the whole body of the stomach and the duodenal bulb. And the duodenal bulb is also not going to be in profile, so you're going to see the duodenal bulb, and it's like from an AP perspective. So that's how come the RAO is so beneficial in terms of the upper GI. So this is going to demonstrate the pylorus, the duodenal bulb, the descending colon, which you can see right here as well, and the fundus and the stomach body without any kind of superimposition. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little sense. Let me get back over here to this. Okay, so in the PA, the RAO position, the barium is going to pool in the pylorus and the duodenal bulb. And this is the duodenal bulb. You see it really well here. And then, of course, the air is going to be in the fundus. So we're going to have barium in the body and in the duodenum. And keep in mind that, let's pay close attention, in this view of the duodenal bulb, there's barium in here, okay? So barium in duodenal bulb, because when we look at the LPO, it's going to look different. To determine if your patient obliquity must be increased or decreased, you're going to want to evaluate the location of the zygapophyseal joints within the vertebral bodies, and then just use your, this is the L spine, basically, T-spine, L spine. Down here is, L1. And so we should be seeing Scotty dogs. I can see a little bit of a Scotty dog through here, but mainly the way we're going to determine, because it depends on the body habitus of the patient, but the main thing that I'm going to look at is just to make sure that this duodenal bulb is free of superimposition over the fundus and the pylorus. So on this patient, I feel like they're rotated a little bit too far. I need to roll them back just a little bit, because you can see that the duodenal bulb is laying over the fundus of the stomach. All right, so continuing on with the RAO oblique, notice here that the zygapophyseal joint is midline to the vertebral body. So on this particular one, again, this is just really hard. This image is really hard to see, but you can see Scotty dog through here, and it's in the middle. Let's see. I'm trying to see if I can draw one. With barium in there, it just makes it really hard to see. We're not really seeing the structures as much, because all the contrast and brightness is focused over here on our barium and air. Okay, here's a Scotty dog right here. I can see this one a little bit better. But anyways, this patient looks to be at a 45 degrees. However, they also appear to be, their stomach appears to be a little bit more horizontal, like they're probably pushing the hypersthenic. And so that might affect how they are positioned. I don't know. There again, with hypersthenic, we're supposed to rotate more. But looking at this right here, with this being over the fundus, I would say we need to roll them back just a little bit. They don't need to be as oblique. So then the lateral stomach is probably your easiest one to identify. I mean, obviously you can look at the vertebral bodies and tell that this person's in a lateral. The other thing that you're going to notice with the lateral stomach and the upper GI is everything is just kind of flat. It should be marked right typically, and everything's just going to be flopped over in front of the vertebral body. So it's just kind of easier to identify than the other positions. But in this particular view, the air contrast is demonstrated in the fundus. So we're going to have, of course, right here, there is some barium, but you do have a little bit of air in the fundus. This in particular position, I would say demonstrates the stomach full of barium the most. Like all the areas are more filled with barium than anything. As to where the other positions, you do see more air in this place and barium in this place, but with the lateral, it almost appears as if there is barium through the whole, through the whole stomach. The posterior surfaces of the vertebral bodies are going to be superimposed. Again, we really don't see them right there, but that's technically, criteria for, if we were doing a lateral anything. The stomach and duodenal bulb and the descending duodenum are anterior to the vertebrae, so that's a key factor too. So we have everything anterior to the vertebrae. You see our duodenal bulb. This is a really good view of the pyloric sphincter right here. You see the pyloric sphincter, and it's emptying through, and then we're seeing the descending duodenum right here. The long axis of the stomach is partially foreshortened with a partially closed lesser curvature. So this is going to be our lesser curvature. So typically when we're in a, in an AP or PA position, the lesser curvature looks a lot different than it does here. So here the greater curvature is going to be on the outside, and this is going to be on the inside here. So it's just all flopped over, right? It's just a little bit opposite. So detecting rotation on a lateral stomach, you're going to use your same criteria that you use when you are doing anything with a spine or a chest or anything else. We're going to look to see if on these posterior vertebrae you can see, if there is rotation. This one actually looks really good. I mean, we got posterior, anterior surface there. That one's really good. Now this one demonstrates it really well with the air and the fundus, but the one we looked at just a minute ago showed, pretty much, barium through the whole thing. So I guess it just kind of depends. This might have been just a single contrast. They may have not added fizzies yet, and that might be why it looks that way. But let's see. Let's move on to the LPO. Again, this is the one that is the most, the RAO and the LPO are the ones that give you the best visualization of the entire stomach and the duodenal bulb and the pylorus and all the structures not superimposed over each other. So those are your two key positions in terms of looking at the whole stomach without anything being overlapping each other. So again, hypersthenic patient on the LPO. Now, I don't know why it says this for the LPO. It only says 60 degrees. If you remember on the RAO, it said 70. I'm sure there's some kind of technicality behind that. Then the sthenic patient is the 45 degrees, and the hyposthenic is going to be 30 degrees. So now, remember I said earlier to pay close attention on our RAO. The duodenal bulb was filled with barium. All of this, the pylorus, all of this was filled with barium. It is literally flip-flopped in the opposite. So now we know that the fundus lays posterior to the body, right? So it makes sense as to why if a patient's laying in a supine position and the fundus lays posterior, kind of tilted back, that's how come all the barium pulls back there. So we know by looking at this patient's spine that we have an oblique. That's kind of a given. Here we can see the Scotty dogs a lot better. We make out, nose, joint, body. It's not lovely, but it's there. So we know this is oblique, and we are assuming that they marked it correctly with the side down. So this one's pretty easy to figure out. But the main thing here, like I said, those RAOs and LPOs were able to look at the stomach as a whole with nothing superimposed over each other. I kind of think, and just remember that the LPO and RAO reflect the same anatomy. It's just that the barium and air are going to be opposite. The patient that's hypersthenic habitus is going to require approximately 60 degrees of obliquity, and one with the asthenic is 30. If the LPO does not demonstrate the pylorus without duodenal bulb and descending duodenum superimposed, or the body without fundic superimposition, the degree of obliquity is insufficient one way or the other. So it either needs to be decreased or increased. Okay, so I would just encourage you to just always look when you're in that LPO or RAO and make sure that you're seeing all of these structures not superimposed. This is pyloric sphincter, duodenal bulb, pylorus, lesser curvature, fundus. I mean, everything looks really, really good here. our AP spot of the duodenal bulb. A lot of times they will do what they call a spot image, and this is what they're honing in on right here. They usually, I'm sure you've seen the radiologist hover over the duodenal bulb, and they're watching for the sphincter to do its job and to see how quick contents empty through here, because oftentimes this is an area where there's a stricture or a functionality type problem. And so they're paying, oh, sorry, here's a duodenal bulb. This is pylorus. But they're watching right here to see how quickly it all empties. This is again just talking about patient obliquity. The AP projection is going to demonstrate the same structures as those demonstrated on the PA. However, of course, the barium location switches. So this is an AP stomach, the supine, patient supine. And of course, this is barium pulling here. So we know that patient's supine. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say on this. This is kind of redundant. Actually, I'm looking at this and it's pretty redundant. Okay, so a rotation on an AP, obviously, or when we're looking even at a spot image, we are looking at, spinous processes. You can see pedicle here, obviously. If they are in an air is up here, right? Barium is down here, so this means that the patient was PA instead of AP, okay? So you do see a little bit of rotation there. The wider areas here, and if it's PA, that means that the area they were rotated over to their right side was closer to the IR. Right side closer to IR. Looking at this stomach, what body habitus would you say this patient is? So remember, actually, it's kind of a tricky one, and here's why. Well, I'm going to go with, first off, they're rotated, okay? So keep that in mind. Your patient is rotated, so the duodenal bulb is in a different location than it normally would be. Oh, this is a lovely view of the pyloric sphincter right here. Pylorus, duodenal bulb, DB. Okay, so normally, remember, in a sthenic patient, typically the duodenal bulb is going to be, kind of over here over the body. And by the looks and the shape of the stomach, I'm going to say that this is a sthenic patient, because if it were a hyposthenic, the stomach and the duodenal bulb would be a lot closer to horizontal, going straight across. So I think the reason that the duodenal bulb is located over here is just because there's some rotation. Okay, so looking at this particular patient, what position is this patient in? Of course, if this actually works, if you're looking at the PowerPoint, you can actually click on these and it works, but this isn't, anyways. Okay, so we've got air in the fundus. So we've got, we know that the patient's spinous processes are meant to be down the middle. So we know that this is either AP or PA. If the patient were supine, the fundus of the stomach's more posterior, so the barium would be up here. But since there's air up here, they're not supine, they're prone. So this is going to be a PA. I don't think that, it does work still. Okay, so it says correct. Oh, I don't know if you have to go back to that. Oops, how did I do that? I don't know what in the world I just did. Maybe that's the last one. Okay, I guess that's the last one. All right, let's see if this lecture works this way.